All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. We have a beautiful shiur ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Elul, Avraham and Shaindy and Kelman, for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of the engagement of Yechiel to Ilana Falick in memory of their parents, Jerome and Bernice Kalman, Alexander and Friderica, David, Zichron, and to thank Barak, Maia, Sandra Hoffman, Dora, Lemus, and Melamed for dedicating the shiurim this month in memory of Reuven ben Emanuel. To thank Ayal Sara Steinberg for dedicating the shiurim this month in the zechus of refuah shelema for Shulamis bas Susha. The Daf Yomi Shiur for dedicating the shiur this month in the zechus of refuah shelema for Yehuda ben Michal. Our week of learning sponsors, Jeff and Karen Cohn. In commemoration of the yahrzeit of Jeff's mother, Elinor Cohn, Elka bas Binyomin. Our day of learning sponsors, Sandra Hoffman, in memory of her mother, Mindel Rudman, Bryna Minna bas Barak, Zichron Livracha, and our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Daniel and Avigail Chaver, Le'iloi Nishmas Yitzchak ben David Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in nechama, and all those who require a refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem. Today's daf is Ayin Zayin 77, a really incredible Gemara ahead of us today. We are picking up on Ayin Vav Mavez 76b, and we left off. Let's pick up. So V'i Yohiv. So it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, about 30 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, the Gemara, just the general topic we're talking about, we started with the Mishnah. And the Mishnah established the principle that essentially wherever the mum is found, that is where we assume it originated. The Gemara now is bringing in a series of cases that are similar to that. The case that we ended off with yesterday is a person who purchases an animal, and after shechting the animal, he discovers that the animal is a treifa. So the question, of course, becomes, when did the animal become a treifa? So we went through a number of different qualities. Again, did the needle pierce both sides of the stomach? Did it scab over? Is there blood? So the Gemara says, "V'iyoiv tabach domi ba'ila asuyei raya umapik." And ultimately, again, if the butcher already paid for the animal, he paid the owner of the animal for the animal, he has to bring a raya that the animal had a pre-existing treifa condition, and then ultimately, again, he would be able to extract the money from the owner. So the Gemara says, "Va'amai, bal behema laisi raya v'nogim." Why don't we say just the opposite, that the owner of the animal should go ahead and bring a raya that the treifa condition only exists, or I should say, came into existence now? He should bring the raya and therefore be able to keep the money. To which the Gemara says, ultimately, what are we talking about? A case where halacha l'maisa, the butcher did not go ahead and pay the money. So the Gemara says, my paska. Now, why would you assume that halacha l'maisa that's the case, right? Why would you assume that? Eloki asrayin v'yecheskel amar lo saisinhu lahani klali dekal Yehuda achim b'shmei d'shua. Both you've seen this statement a number of times. Rabbi Yechiel said, "Do not pay any attention to the principles that my brother Yehuda espouses in the name of Shmuel, because halchet mashmal. This is what Shmuel really said. Kol shinol safek b'shuso alav haraya." Shmuel said that halacha l'maisa will say, in whoever's possession the suffix occurs, that is the person ultimately again who's obligated to bring the rayas, upon whom is the burden of proof. The tanatuna kala, and a similar case is the case of kala, which I will say is exactly the case of our Mishnah, right? That essentially wherever the mum originates or wherever the mum is discovered, that is the person ultimately again who bears the burden of proof. So meisvei, the Gemara raises the kasha, meisvei machat shenem sab nishenim teis ba'ovi beis hakosos. If you find a needle through the stomach, one of the stomachs of the animal, so the Gemara quotes that case. V'idalo yoyev tabach. Now again, if we're talking about a case where the butcher did not yet pay money, so the Gemara says bal behema ba'ila suyei raya umapik. Then in that case, the owner of the animal is obligated to go ahead and bring a raya that the treifa siman only originated after the sale of the animal, and by that he could extract the money. Va'amai, why should we say that? Sveka b'shos tabach is yalid. The suffix began in the rishus of the butcher. So to which the Gemara says, you're right, the yoiv tabich domi. We're talking about a case ultimately again where the butcher paid money. The Gemara says, my pascha, why would you assume that the butcher already paid for the animal? So we'll say the Gemara ends off with a very simple principle, which is stamad the milsa, kamad lo yoiv inish zuzi lo yoiv inish chiyusa. Because there's a simple principle in life. If you don't pay money, you don't get the animal. In other words, the easiest default case for us to deal with is where the butcher already paid the money. And ultimately, again, now he's in possession of the animal. He discovers the mum once the mum is in his possession. So both sides, again, the Gemara is just trying to bring different cases to support our Mishnah, or that are similar to our Mishnah, but still with our guiding light principle. All roads lead back to our Mishnah. Again, we have a case of a mum that is discovered. If the Mishnah said, if the mum is discovered in the father's house, then ultimately, again, that is where the father has the obligation to prove that the mum only occurred after Erisin. So the mum is discovered after Nisuin. The burden of proof is upon the husband to go ahead and show that the mum was a pre-existing condition. Good. The Chum say, when is this true? Only, the Mishnah said, only if we're talking about mumin that are on parts of the body that are covered, right? Because then one could claim a mekach tos. But if it's a mum that was observable, then we assume that what? The husband saw it and he accepted it. Amr of Nachman says, tap of ayin zayin, v'nichba kimumin shebesefer. I will say nichba, Rashi says, is choli shemimenu nofel haaretz, v'yesh lo zman lavo. We'll say this is top of 77a. So, interestingly enough, the Mishnah describing over here seizures. So, nichba is often translated as epilepsy. Epilepsy is considered to be a mum shebeseser, a hidden mum. So the Gemara says, "Vahani nili." This is only true dikavia le zman. What I will say is interesting. I don't know. I guess at least in the times of the Gemara, it might have been that there are different forms of epilepsy. Well, there are different forms of epilepsy. But what they're describing over here is that halacha l'maisa, in this situation of epilepsy, the seizures would come at defined intervals. So if a woman has epilepsy in a way that seizures come at defined intervals, there's the possibility that what? That she could go ahead and hide this condition from her chassan. So in a situation like that, epilepsy, even though again it presents with seizures, which are obviously again begaloi, can be seen, if she knows that it only occurs at certain times, she could be sure not to be seen by her chassan at those times, and therefore this is called a mum shebeseser, a hidden mum. Avalo kviyalei, but ultimately, again, if it's the type of epilepsy that the seizures don't come at particular intervals, but instead, again, come at any time, then it's considered to be a revealed mum, a revealed blemish, and therefore, again, if he married her anyway, that means that's what? That he accepted this mum. Incredible. So we'll see now we're going to turn the tables a little bit. Says the Mishnah, Ha'ish shenoldu ba mumin. So we'll listen to this. Let's say a man, now noldu bo literally means what? Noldu bo literally means developed. So it sounds like what we're talking about over here is a case where the man developed the mum sometime later on. Again, we'll discuss this in the Gemara in just a moment. So ish shenoldu ba mumin. If a man developed mumin in kofin osa lahotzi, we do not force him to divorce his wife. When is this true? B'mumin hakitanin, with small mumin. However, afal b'mumin hagidolim, but with significant mumin, kofin oso lahotzi, we would force him to go ahead and divorce his wife. So let's talk about this. It says the Gemara, Yehuda tani noldu, chia barav tani hayu. So we'll say two different versions of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says that the word of the Mishnah is noldu. Noldu means what? He developed a mum. So we'll say developed usually, how would we understand developed? Developed when? After marriage. In other words, during marriage. So this was not a pre-existing condition. Instead, this was something that developed during marriage. Chia Barav says, no. The word of the Mishnah is hayu. We're talking about a case where the man had the mum, it was a pre-existing condition. So man da'amar noldu kol shekein hayu des kasava v'kibla. So I'll say the opinion who holds, ultimately again noldu, that we're talking about a case of where he developed a mum during marriage, and again the Mishnah is saying we don't force him to divorce her, would all the more so agree that what? That if he had the mum, if it was a pre-existing condition, we would not force him to divorce her. Why not? Because again, if it was a pre-existing condition, that means she knew about it. If she knew about it and married him anyway, what does that mean? She accepted it. However, man damar hayu aval nodu lo. I will say, but according to the opinion, it says that the Mishnah says hayu, which means it was a pre-existing condition. That's fine. If she knew about it and accepted it, that's one thing. But noldu means they developed during marriage. Who says that she is willing to live with that mum? To which the Gemara says, when is this so? Now the Gemara goes on. When is this so? That we don't force the husband to divorce the wife because of a mum. B'mumin kitanim, with small mumin. Aval b'mumin gidolim kofin oso lahotzi. But with significant mumin, we would force the husband to divorce his wife. So Bishlam Lamanda Noldu, so it's according to the opinion that says the mum developed, meaning post-marriage, then Hainu Dishaini Ben Gidol Miktana. I understand the distinction between what we'll call a large mum and a small mum. Elamand Amar Hayu. But according to the opinion that says that this was a pre-existing condition, Mali Gidolim, Mali Kitanim, Hasavra Vikibla. See, if we're talking about a mum that was a pre-existing condition, there's no discussion, big mum, small mum, significant mum, insignificant mum. If it's pre-existing, then what? She knew about it. If she knew about it and she married him, what does that tell us? She accepted it. To which the Gemara says, no. To which the Gemara says, Kisvurihi, she yechola lekabel, va'achshav ein yechola lekabel. To which the Gemara says, it's not necessarily true. It's actually pretty incredible. That even if it was a pre-existing condition, it's possible that sometimes a woman gets married, she knows about the mum of her husband, but yet she assumes she could handle it. And then after marriage and living with this man, with this mum, she realizes, I can't. I will say, by the way, it's a very profound yesod, that there are times in life that we think that we could handle certain things, right? I see a situation, I assess the situation, and I assume I could handle this. And then I get into it, and I start trying to handle it, and I realize, I can't. To which the Gemara says, "Ve'eluhin mumin gidolim." So we'll say, what are some examples of a mum gadol, of a significant mum? Pirush Reb Kalman Akiva Kovacs, nismis eino, being blind in one eye, nikta'a yado, ultimately again missing a hand, right? V'nishbara raglo, literally means a broken foot. But lamaisa, again, in this context, broken foot doesn't mean something that is going to heal, right? It means that someone is crippled. So we'll say, so it's interesting, by the way, how again the Gemara defines mum gadol as a physical handicap. It's physical handicap. So itmar Rabbi Abba Bar Yaakov Omer Rabbi Yochanan Lach Reb Shimon Gamliel. So we'll say, listen to this. Rabbi Abba Bar Yaakov says the halacha follows Reb Shimon Gamliel. Namely, that although the Mishnah says that we don't force a husband to divorce his wife, ultimately, again, if a mum developed, right? Because remember, again, the simple girsa of the Mishnah is noldu, which means it developed now. Ultimately, again, if it's a mum gadol, we will force him to divorce her, and or if she wants to get divorced. Rava Amar Avram Nachman halach k'divrei chachamim. The halacha follows the chachamim. Namely, that halacha l'maisa, even with a mum gadol, we won't force a husband to divorce his wife. Rabbi Yochanan actually say this. V'ha'amar Rava Bar Chana Am Rabbi Yochanan b'chol makom shesharim Shel Gamliel mishtasein halacha kimoso. Yet Rabbi Bar Chana said whenever Reb Shimon Gamliel is in our Mishnah, the halacha always follows Reb Shimon Gamliel. In which case, halacha l'maisa would seem to be that in a case of mum gadol, we would force the husband to divorce his wife. To which the Gemara says chutz, with the exceptions of arev, tzidon, bere'iyah achrona. So I'll say these are three cases where the halacha doesn't follow Shimon Gamliel. To which the Gemara says, you're right, amorai ninhu va'ali with Rabbi Yochanan. To which the Gemara says, ultimately, again, it's a machlokes amoraim, and ultimately, again, this is in accordance with Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi say, so again, we're not going to do the halacha l'mais here because we're not finished with this sugya, but what I do want to point out to you is something really interesting, which is that halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah now introduces me to this concept that if certain women develop in the husband over the course of marriage, you can't go ahead and force him to divorce his wife based on that. Now again, I will say, if she makes a Tanai at the outset, before Erusin, right, the same way that he can make a Tanai, right, that Hariat Mikudeshus the Amanas, whatever, she could also make a Tanai. She could also make a condition that I'm getting married. So if she were to make a condition, I'm getting married to on the condition, you don't have a mum, and he does have a mum, then ultimately, again, of course, the marriage will. But assuming no such condition was made, the Mishnah is introducing us to the idea that we cannot force a husband to divorce his wife because of a mum that develops in him. Now let's further qualify this a little bit. Ve'elu shekofin oso lahotzi. But there are cases, it's interesting. So right after we just say that we don't force a husband to divorce his wife because of a mum, the Mishnah now says we don't force him to divorce his wife in the case of a mum except when we do. Right? And when are the cases where we'll force a husband to divorce his wife because of a mum? Here are cases where if a husband has this condition, we will force his wife to divorce. We will force him to divorce his wife. Now, I will say, just want to point out, what does it mean we force him to divorce his wife? What does that mean? What that means is that Chazal said in certain circumstances, we do not see this marriage as a benefit for the wife. It's a benefit for the wife. Right? Therefore, Chazal effectively advocate on her behalf for the dissolution of this marriage. So let's see. What are some examples? Here are the cases where because of a certain condition, ultimately Chazal will advocate on behalf of the woman for the dissolution of the marriage. What are they? Mukas shchin, a man who is covered in boils. Mukas shchin. Bal polifus, a person who suffers from polyphus. We'll see what that means in the Gemara. V'hamekametz. And I will say some of these terms we'll define. We'll have to see what they mean. Mekametz means someone who gathers what we'll see. V'hametzarif nechoshes, one who goes ahead and literally again refines copper. Borsi, a tanner. Now I will say, out of all of these cases, the one I understand is what? A tanner. What's wrong with the tanner? Tanning has a terrible, terrible odor. The issue is that a tanner often, again, had that odor. In other words, I guess when you work around that odor all of the time, it seeps into your skin. So the problem is, he was a man who smelled very badly. So a man is a tanner, and ultimately, again, his wife can't handle it. We go ahead and we advocate on her behalf for the dissolution of this marriage. The Rabbi say, the Mishnah makes an interesting qualification. Bein chayu achlo nisu, bein b'shenisu noldu. So we'll say, this is true, by the way, whether these conditions were pre-existing conditions, or whether quote unquote they developed after marriage. Either of us, in other words, we see these as objective circumstances that a regular human being cannot live with. And therefore, again, even if we want to say, but you knew about it, right? Husband says, you knew I was a tanner, right? Or you knew I had boils, or this, or that. Lemais, again, we understand that objectively, even if she thought she could handle it, we understand why objectively now she could claim, I can't handle it, and therefore we advocate on her behalf. V'akulon amra ba'armer avapi shehisna ima yechol lihisha tomar svura hayisi shani yechol lekabel v'achshav in yechol lekabel, and that's what again, as we just mentioned before. Even though in all of these cases he said to her, look, I want to be transparent about who I am, what I am, and what I do. Right? I have boils, I have polyphus, I'm a gatherer, I work with copper, I'm a tanner. He's putting, right? It's on a shidduch resume. In other words, he was totally transparent about all of this stuff. Lamaisa, at the end of the day, she could claim, I got it. I'm not claiming you deceived me. I understand that. It's not the shot like I thought you were an accountant and it turns out that you're a tanner. Right? I got it. In other words, I know you were transparent. I thought I could handle it. I can't. So say, yeah, okay, so now we'll have Chum say, Mekabela si al karcha. The Chum say, no, listen. If she knew about it, and halacha l'maisa, she said she can handle it, then she said she can handle it. In other words, we'll say, that doesn't mean that she's stuck in the marriage, but in other words, what it means is we're not going to advocate on her behalf for the dissolution of the marriage. So, chutz mi mukashchin. Supposed to be the exception of mukashchin, someone who's covered in boils. Mipnei shemasko. So we're going to see, because someone who's covered in boils, we'll say, ultimately physical intimacy becomes impossible, and in fact, interestingly enough, is detrimental to the health of the husband. So in a case like that, where ultimately, again, the condition pretty much just impedes any normative married life, then we'll advocate for her, even though what? She knew about the condition. Story. It's a very interesting case. But say Reuven was married to Rachel, right? So the story that happened in Sidon. And Reuven was a tanner. Right? And what happened? Reuven died without children. So now his wife Rachel falls to his brother Shimon for Yibum, and Shimon is also a tanner. Amru Chachamim. Where Chachamim said, Yechol l'chisha tomer la'achicha hayisi l'chol l'kabel. U'lecha ein yechol l'kabel. She could say, listen, I was able to stand your brother who was a tanner. I can't stand you who's a tanner. In other words, what the Gemara is saying is like this, that she could say, listen, Reuven was a tanner, but he had many other redeeming qualities. And therefore, again, I was able to go ahead and deal with the fact that he had this odor. You, brother Shimon, you're a nice guy, but I don't see the same qualities in you, and therefore, again, even though you have the same profession as my husband, I don't think I could do Yibum because of your profession. And ultimately, again, we would accept that claim, and therefore force Shimon to go ahead and do Chalitza. In other words, what the Mishnah is introducing us is, just because a woman accepted one husband as a tanner, doesn't automatically mean that she'll accept any husband as a tanner. Okay, incredible. Says the Gemara, my Baal Polifos. What is Baal Polifos, right? Remember again, one of the conditions that the Mishnah said that could trigger a divorce, that we would force him to divorce his wife, is if he has Polifos. What's Polifos? So listen to this. Amrav Yehuda Mashwal Reach HaChotem. Literally an odor of the nose. His nose omits some type of odor. Maslisatana Reach HaPeh. Chronic bad breath. Ravasi Masni. Ravasi is just the opposite. Umanach Simna, he gave it a way to remember it. Shmuel pasik pume mikule pirkin. That Shmuel is constantly giving opinions throughout the Mishnah. Therefore, Shmuel is the one who said that it's bad breath. It also is coming to between nose odor and bad breath. Again, these are true, right? These are chronic conditions that ultimately, again, impede a husband and wife from coming close to each other. So ultimately, again, it's pretty difficult to have a normative marriage in a situation like this. Ba'amekametz, gatherer of what? This is someone who goes ahead and collects dog excrement. I will say this is interesting. Rashi says, Lo yadati matzorech ba. So Rashi says, I don't know why someone would do this, right? But I will say, look at this, very interesting. But he writes over here, Aval ba'Ashkenaz, in Ashkenaz in Germany, it's always the yakas, right? Listen to this, Aval Ashkenaz, Ra'isi sheshar b'am ha'begadim lifnei kovson yoma yoman. This is fascinating. Apparently, they used to use dog excrement as some type of detergent, which is quite fascinating. He says, I saw in Ashkenaz that they would let the clothing sit in it for a day or two before laundry. I guess if you let your clothing sit in it, whatever stains you did have on it no longer matter. Right? So again, it must be dried out or whatever. However they used it. The point is, he's not. I will say, actually interesting. In different masechtas, sometimes dog excrement was also used as part of the tanning process. Okay, in any event, the point is, there's a reason for it, but this is his occupation. This is occupation. So therefore, again, such an occupation could be grounds, ultimately, again, to trigger the divorce. So may say, Mekamitz bursi. So we'll say, yet elsewhere, the Bryce says, Mekamitz is a tanner. But according to that, the Mishnah is problematic, because what does the Mishnah say? Ha-Mekamitz va-mitzarif nechoshes va-bursi. So we'll say, in our Mishnah, it states both Mekamitz and bursi, and tanner, which would indicate us that they're not the same thing. So b'shlomas nisan lo kashya kamba borsi gadol kamba borsi katan. Maybe the Mishnah is making a difference between different kinds of tanners, right? There are I guess full-time tanners and part-time tanners. So the Mishnah is coming to issue that whether he's a full-time tanner or a part-time tanner, that could trigger a divorce. Allah Yehuda kashya. But according to Yehuda, what does he do with this? To which the Gemara says, right, Tanaihi, it's machlokes tanoim as to how to go ahead and define mekametz. Tisanya, mekametz zeb bursi. So again, we learned in our Bryce that mekametz, that's a tanner. Veish omrim, za mekametz tzavas kalavim. Or others say, no, it's one who goes ahead and collects dog excrement. Okay, so we'll say, whether it's a tanner or whether it's collecting dog excrement, the point is it's the type of profession where even if she knew about it ahead of time, and she thought, I could handle this, if she turns around and says, I can't, we allow that to trigger the divorce. So we advocate for divorce on her behalf. So we'll say, my mitzarif nechoshes. What does it mean ultimately, again, that someone refines copper? Rav Ashi Amar, chashli dudi. Rav Ashi says, it's one Rabbi say who hammers out copper. So apparently hammering out copper, like a tanner, has a terrible, terrible odor. And so that odor ultimately impacts the person who's doing this work. It means someone who mines copper. We'll say either way, the ideal here is the same, which is it has to do with the odor. So Tanya Kaval say that's what Rabbi Rechano Ezu Mitzarif. What's Mitzarif? Zamechatech nechoshes meikaro. Someone who mines copper. Amarav. Okay, so we'll say that's all these cases. Amarav. Haomer eini zan ve'ini mefarnis. If a man says to his wife, ultimately, again, I'm not going to feed you, I'm not going to support you. Yotzi v'itein ksuva. In that case, we force him to divorce her and pay her ksuva. You're not going to feed your wife, you're not going to support your wife, you're not a husband. Okay, so divorce her and pay her ksuva. Azra Balazar, Amar l'Shmai Teka made the Shmuel. Balazar came along and said over this ruling in front of Shmuel. Amar, Shmuel said, Ach suha sa'ari le'elazar. So go ahead and feed barley to Elazar. I will say, saying go feed barley to someone was an insult. Right? Barley is animal food. So we'll say, this is a good one. If you ever want to insult someone and they don't even know, all right, what you say, yeah, why don't you go have some barley? Right? So the Daf Yomi guys will chuckle and the person might not know what you're talking about. So we'll say, so again, they said, go feed barley to Elazar. What are you talking about over here? Again, instead of forcing him to divorce his wife, force him to what? To support her. Force him to do good. Force him to make good on this. Rav said you can't do that. Ein adam dar im nachash bekafifa. You can't live with a snake in a basket, which we'll say is the expression for a chazal, which is an incredible idea. You can't build a marriage with unpredictable people. Right? We'll say it's an incredibly important yesod. Right? Predictability is almost like a sense of consistency and continuity is necessary for a marriage. So if this is the kind of guy who says to his wife, I'm not feeding you, I'm not supporting you, so great, you force him to support. You can't build a marriage with a person like this. You can't live in the basket with a snake. When Rabbi Zera came, Binyomin Bar Yafis, he found Rabbi Yom Yafis who was sitting and said over the name of Rabbi Yochanan, about this matter, they gave Elazar to eat barley in Bavel. Okay, we'll say first the widest line. We only force a husband to divorce his wife in a situation where he's married to someone who is pasul. When I said this in front of Shmuel, for example, Kigon, Almana lekoin gadol, Grusha v'chalutza lekoin hedyot, Mamzeres v'nesin lebas Yisrael, Bas Yisrael v'nesin u'lemamzer. But say, when do we force divorce? When it's a legal marriage. Right, the Kohen Gadol is married to a widow. Right, the regular Kohen is married to a divorcee. A Yisrael marries a mamzeres. Those are illegal marriages, and that's what forces a divorce. Aval. Nasa isha v'sha ima eser shana v'lo yolda. Now we'll say, let's say a man is married to a woman, and they haven't had children for 10 years. So ein kofin oso. In that case, we do not force him to divorce her. And I will say, we've seen this before. What's the novelty in that? Even though a man has an obligation to pay Revia. And Chazal say that if you live with a woman for 10 years and you don't have children, mitzvah legarsha v'lisa acheres, it is a mitzvah to divorce her and marry someone else so you can have children. The Gemara says, we don't force divorce in a case like that. We only force divorce where the marriage represents active isser, active prohibition. In a case where marriage is not allowing for opportunity to perform a mitzvah, ultimately, again, we will not force divorce. Not true. Even in a case where husband and wife have lived together for 10 years and don't have a child, we will force divorce in such a situation to allow the husband to fulfill the mitzvah privilege. So we'll say, so essentially what it's saying is like this. What's the machlokes? Everyone agrees we force divorce when the marriage represents an aveira. What's the shayla? Do we force divorce where the marriage stands in your way of the performance of a mitzvah? So one opinion says no, second opinion says yes. So Tanan, Ilu Shekov and also the Hotzi, both say, but look at our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says, when do we force divorce? Mukashchin bal polifos bishon Ravasi. So according to Ravasi, I understand again, the Mishnah is only talking about cases of Dirabanans. Right? These are Dirabanan cases. Doraisa lo katani. The Mishnah doesn't include a case where what? Where the couple has lived together for 10 years, they don't have children. Of course we force divorce in a case like that, so the husband could fulfill the mitzvah Doraisa, or for that matter again, even in Isuri Doraisa. So El Rav Tachlifa Baravdimi, listening Nasa Isha v'Shayima Eser Shanim. So I'll say, according to Rav Tachlifa Baravdimi, why doesn't the Mishnah also include the case of where Allah Lamaisa? So again, according to the first opinion, the Mishnah is only talking about the Rabbanans. It's not including any Doraisa cases. But according to Rav Tachlifa, why not also include the case of the Mishnah of a man and woman who lived together for 10 years? There are no children that will force them to get divorced. The husband could have children. To which the Gemara says, to which the Gemara, Nachman lo kashya, last line I will say, habamili, habeshuti. Very interesting I will say. Ultimately, again, the Mishnah is talking about cases where we force divorce with words. We coerce them to get divorced with words. What don't we utilize? Physical force. Yet, in the case of where they've been married for 10 years, and what? And there are no children, in that case, I will say we would use force. Shuti literally means a rod. Look at Rashi, last Rashi, Havamili, apir v'rivi b'mili miasrinon, b'shute lo radina le. Aval hanach b'shute nami radina le shi efshal lekabel. So I'll say, I'm sorry, just the opposite. The cases in the Mishnah is where we'll force divorce even with physical force. Even with physical force, b'shuti. The case of Pir v'rivya, ultimately again will force divorce, but not with force. Only with words. Maskif la Rabbi Abba, bidvarim lo yusar eved. Rabbi Abba quoted the pasuk that says, with words you cannot chastise a servant, which means generally coercing people with words, at least in matters of divorce, doesn't work. To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Abba, hava habeshuti. You're right. In all of these cases, both the case of the Mishnah as well as the case of Pir v'rivya will force divorce with physical force. Hasam, listen to this. Hasam ki amra habina bahadei shafkinan. Well, here's what's interesting. In the cases of the Mishnah, what happens if the woman turns around and says, you know what? I'm okay with the mum. The guy is a mukashchin, right? The guy is a tanner. She says, you know what? I'm okay with this. So we'll say, if she says she's okay with it, then what? We let it go. Hacha, in the case of Pir v'rivya, afagav da amra habina bahadei lo shafkin. Ultimately, again, but in the case of Pir v'rivya, even if she says, I'm okay with this, we don't allow the marriage to continue. Why? Because that marriage stands in the way of his fulfillment of Pir v'rivya. But I will say, what about the case of mukashchin? The guy covered with boils, the Mishnah said, even if she says what? Even if she says, I'm okay with this, we don't let them stay together. Why? Disnan. So we'll say, because remember, mukashchin, the problem is, I will say, that remaining married and having an intimate life is physically detrimental for his condition. Vikatani hasam, and we said over there, ki amra dairana bahadi sadi shafkinala. So I'll say, interestingly enough, in the case of mukashchin, if they agree to live together in the presence of witnesses, meaning what? To ensure that there's no intimacy, okay, if that's how they want to live, we let the marriage continue. Hacha afal gav the dairina bahadi besadi lo shafkinala. I will say, but if she claims, okay, with Pir v'rivya, we'll live together with witnesses, obviously that's not going to work. So I will say, so essentially what you have over here really are three categories of cases. You have the case of where the marriage represents an Isser D'Oraisa, biblical prohibition. Kohen Gadol married to a widow, regular Kohen married to a divorcee, Yisrael married to a Mamzeres. In those cases, the halacha, of course, automatically says that halacha they have to get divorced. Then you have the next category, what we'll call the Dirabanans, which is our Mishnah, which are really situations of either physical conditions or professions that make a normal married life impossible. In those cases, what's the halacha? We will advocate on her behalf for the dissolution of the marriage. We'll force him to divorce her. What if she says, I'll live with the condition, I'm okay with it, then what? We let her, with the exception, of course, of mukashchin. Mukashchin, where ultimately, again, remaining married and intimate life is physically detrimental to him, will force divorce. Third category, I will say, is let's say where marriage has existed for 10 years and has not produced children. So now we assume at this point, this marriage is not going to result in Pir v'rivya. So here, the marriage doesn't represent an Isser. What does the marriage represent? An inability to perform a mitzvahs aseh, a positive commandment for the husband. Because remember again, a woman does not have an obligation of procreation. It's on the husband. So what do we do in that case? So we'll say here there are two schools of thought. Right? One school of thought is that halacha l'maisa, we force divorce. We force divorce because this marriage is standing in the way of the husband's fulfillment of a mitzvah saseh. Second opinion is, look, if they want to stay married, they'll stay married. We'll say, how do we pass it in this case? Very interesting. The Shulchan Aruch says, contemporarily, in marriages which we know are not going to produce children, halacha doesn't intervene. If this is what the couple wants, and this is, we do not, the same way, by the way, we'll say, remember again, back in Yevamos, the Gemara said that if a young man is going to marry a much, much older woman, in a way that halacha l'maisa, they're not going to have children, the Gemara says we don't let them get married. The Shulchan Aruch says, today, we don't intervene in such unions. See, even though if there's a marriage that either we know from the outset is not going to produce children, or the couple's been married for 10 years and they haven't had children, that Shulchan Aruch paskins, we do not intervene in marriages like this. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Sachli Zakin Echame Anshe Yushalayim. Shabbos say, listen to this. So Rabbi Yossi said, an old man from Jerusalem, one of the old men of Jerusalem told me the following. Listen to this fascinating Gemara. There are 24 different types of boil conditions. That's the right word. Right? 24 different types of boils, mukushchin, of being afflicted with boils. The Kulan Amru Chachamim, Tashmish Kasha, and I will say all of these physical conditions are aggravated by Tashmish. Right? By Tashmish, by relations. Ubali Ra'asan Kasha Mikulan. I will say the hardest form of mukushchin, the most intense form, ultimately again is Ba'ale Ra'asan. Ra'asan, that was the condition. So the Gemara says, Mimai Havi, how do you get Rasan? Where does that come from? So it's fascinating. Disanya, Hekiz Dam V'Shimish, if a person does bloodletting and then has relations immediately afterwards, Havi Lo Banin Viskin, he will have weak children. Hekiz V'Shnei V'Shim, if both husband and wife did bloodletting and then had relations, Havi Lo Banim Ba'ali Rasan, they will have children afflicted by Rasan. Samra Papa, this is only true if you don't eat anything after bloodletting. But if you eat something after bloodletting and then have relations, the children will be okay. So the Gemara says, "My simane." We'll say, what are the symptoms of Ra'asan? Right? What are the symptoms? We'll say, so it's interesting. Even though the Gemara is grouping this together with muki shchin, being afflicted with boils, we're going to see Ra'asan. Ra'asan doesn't necessarily just present with boils. How does Ra'asan present? This is fascinating. Dalfon ene, teary eyes, v'daivi nechure, a dripping nose, va'isila reire mipume, and ultimately again drooling. So teary eyes, runny nose, and drooling. So the Gemara says, "V'rami didaive iluye," and there are flies constantly around him. O Maia suse. So I will say, how do you go ahead? How do you cure Ra'asan? Then I will say, I want to point out there, if you look at Rashi's on both sides of this Gemara. Look at Rashi on the right side for just a moment. Rashi identifies something amazing. Bali Ra'asan, Sheretz Yeshlo B'mocho. We'll say, what does it mean, Sheretz Yeshlo B'mocho? Rashi identifies Ra'asan as a parasite. It's some type of parasite which embeds itself on the membrane on the brain. So I will say, so incredible. So that's how they're identifying it. So how do you cure it? I will say, get ready for this. I want to point out, do not try this at home. Right? Again, remember, whenever you see Talmudic medicine, this is not uniquely Jewish. This was the conventionally held opinions. So listen to this. Rabbi, what should you do? Pila veludna. Go ahead and take pennyroyal, wormwood, girda da'agoza, the bark of a nut tree, of a walnut tree, the girda da'ashpa, the shavings of a hide, the kalil malka, take a lily flower, umaschala didikla sumka, and take the husks of dates, dark dates, the shalak luhu b'hadiyada, they cook all of these things together, uma'ayli le'le beis de shisha, take it into a house of marble. Now we'll say the chaput or vilo, if you can't find a house of marble, vilo ikabisa de shesha, my vilo lebesa de shev velivni aricha. Take it to a house whose walls are 7.5 bricks thick. The idea I will say over here is you need to apply this remedy in a place where there is no breeze. There is no breeze. And what should you do? V'nota leitzla me kasi arashe. Pour 300 cups of this concoction on the head of the afflicted patient, adiraf yar isa, demochia, until the top of the scalp becomes soft. Vikar lemoche, open up the scalp, umaisi arba taifi da'aza, Then Abba says, now when you open up the scalp, you're going to expose the parasite. When you expose the parasite, then what happens? Bring 4 leaves. Umadli kochad kara, umosiv chad, b'shakal b'tzivsa. So we'll say, and put each leg, the parasite has 4 legs, put each leg on one of the leaves, and right on one at a time. We'll say the idea is you have to remove the parasite very gently, because otherwise Rashi says what happens? It will embed itself on the brain and kill the patient. Then pick up the parasite with tongs, the kalila, and burn it. Di'i lo hadar ibuya. Ultimately, again, because if not, the parasite will come back. So we'll say that is the cure, says the Mefarashim. I'm going to stop over here for today. Again, I don't know what the survival rate was, right? But Lamaisa will say, but again, this was the medicine of Rebbe. So start for today. I just want to give you coming attractions tomorrow, ridiculously amazing Gemara. So I'll say, so that's our start. Amir Hashem, shorter daf tomorrow, so we'll be back on track. Shkoyah. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone.